The wagon that brought Arlen Voss to the middle of frozen hell didn't even slow down properly. It just lurched to a stop, wheels cracking through ice, and the driver, a tobacco-stained man named Herrick, who worked for the land baron, jerked his thumb toward the cabin. "That's it," he said. Didn't look at her. Hadn't looked at her the entire 3-day journey. "Get out." Arlen's fingers were numb inside her thin gloves. The cold had worked its way through every layer she owned, which wasn't many. She climbed down, boots hitting frozen earth, and immediately her legs almost gave out. 3 days sitting cramped in a wagon bed did that. The cabin squatted against the landscape like something beaten into submission, logs dark with age and weather, roof sagging on one side, a single window, glass so dirty it looked like cataracts. Smoke came from the chimney, though, thin and gray, which meant someone was inside. Her husband. The word tasted like copper in her mouth. She'd never met Calder Rusk, never even heard his name until 2 weeks ago when her stepfather, Vernon, came home drunk and meaner than usual and told her she was leaving. Told her he'd made an arrangement, that some rancher out west needed a wife and Vernon needed cash, and wasn't it convenient how those two problems solved each other? "You're 23, Vernon had said, whiskey sour on his breath. "Past marrying age anyway. Should be grateful someone wants you." Arlen hadn't felt grateful. She'd felt the floor drop out from under her life. But you didn't argue with Vernon when he'd been drinking. You didn't argue with him sober either, not if you wanted to wake up without new bruises. So she'd packed what little she owned into a canvas bag, and when the wagon came, she got in it. And now she was here, middle of Wyoming territory. February. With a man she'd never met and a future that looked about as promising as the gray sky overhead. "You gonna stand there all day?" Herrick called from the wagon. He was already turning the horses. "I got a schedule." "Where's—" Arlen's voice cracked. She cleared her throat. "Where's the man I'm supposed to—" "Inside, I guess. Or out back. Hell if I know." Herrick spat into the snow. "Rusk don't talk much. You'll figure that out quick. Wait." But the wagon was already moving, wheels crunching through ice, pulling away. Within a minute, it was just a dark shape against all that white. Then nothing. Arlen stood there, canvas bag at her feet, wind cutting through her coat like it wasn't even there. The cabin door didn't open. She waited. Figured maybe he was waiting for her to come inside. Or maybe he was watching from the window. She couldn't tell. The glass was too dirty. After 5 minutes, her feet started going numb. "Hell with this," she muttered. She picked up her bag and walked toward the cabin. The snow was deeper than it looked, mid-calf in places. Her skirt dragged through it, hem getting soaked and heavy. By the time she reached the door, her legs were shaking. She knocked. 3 times. Nothing. "Mr. Rusk?" Her voice sounded small against all that empty space. I'm Arlen Voss. I was told to—" The door opened. Not all the way. Just a crack. And the man on the other side didn't step into view. "You can come in," he said, voice flat, rough, like he didn't use it much. "Or you can freeze. Don't matter to me." Then the door swung wider and he walked away, back into the darkness of the cabin, leaving her standing there. Arlen took a breath. The air burned her lungs. Then she went inside. The cabin was one room. That was the first thing she noticed. One room with a fireplace on the far wall, a rough-built table, 2 chairs, a bed shoved in the corner. The bed? Jesus. One bed. Of course there was only one bed. What did she expect? The second thing she noticed was the cold. It was barely warmer inside than out. The fire in the hearth was so small it was almost pathetic, just a few pieces of wood burning down to coals. The third thing was the man. Calder Rusk stood with his back to her, facing the fire. Tall, but not in a way that suggested strength so much as something stretched too thin. Broad shoulders under a worn canvas coat, dark hair that needed cutting. He didn't turn around. Arlen set her bag down by the door. Water from her hem was already puddling on the floor. She started. "I know who you are." His tone wasn't hostile exactly, just empty, like he was stating a fact about the weather. She waited for him to say something else. He didn't. Is there something I should—" There's a hook on the wall for your coat. Still didn't turn around. Bucket of water by the door if you need to wash. Outhouse is 30 feet northwest. You'll see the path. Arlen blinked. That was it? That was the greeting? Mr. Rusk? Don't call me that. What should I call you? Calder, or nothing. I don't care. He moved then, finally, crossing to the table where a half-empty bottle sat next to a tin cup. He poured whiskey into the cup, drank it in one swallow, poured another. His hands were shaking slightly. She could see that even from across the room. He was younger than she expected, maybe 30. Lean face, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in a week. He looked hollowed out, like something had scooped out whatever used to be inside and left just the shell. I didn't ask for this, he said, still not looking at her. Just so you know, wasn't my idea. Wasn't mine either. That got him to glance at her. Just for a second, his eyes were pale gray, the color of dirty ice. Then I guess we're both stuck. He drank the second cup of whiskey, set it down hard enough that it clattered against the table, and walked toward the door. Grabbed a coat off another hook, thicker than the one he was wearing, and shrugged into it. Where are you going? Arlen asked. Out. Out where? Does it matter? I don't know where anything is. I don't know what I'm supposed to. You're not supposed to do anything. He pulled on gloves, wouldn't meet her eyes. There's jerky in the tin on the shelf. Bread's probably stale, but it's edible. Fire's gonna die if you don't feed it. Woods outside, north side of the cabin. Don't go wandering off, you'll get lost and freeze, and I'm not looking for you. That's it? That's all you're going to... The door opened, wind howled in. He stepped out into it, and the door slammed shut behind him. Arlen stood there in the dim, cold cabin, listening to his footsteps crunch away through the snow. Then she was alone. She didn't cry. She wanted to, but she didn't. Crying was for people who had the luxury of breaking down, and she'd learned years ago that luxury wasn't for her. Instead, she took off her wet coat, hung it on the hook, and looked around. The cabin was worse up close. Gaps between the logs where the chinking had come loose. She could see daylight through some of them, feel wind coming in. The floor was packed dirt, frozen hard. The bed was a wooden frame with a mattress that was probably just hay in a canvas sack. One thin blanket. The fireplace was barely functional. The stone was cracked, and half the mortar had crumbled away. The fire itself was dying because there were maybe 3 pieces of wood left in the pile next to it. The shelf Calder mentioned held a tin of jerky, a cloth-wrapped chunk of bread gone hard, a jar of something that might have been preserves, and 2 tin plates. That was it. That was all the food. Christ, Arlen whispered. She'd known it would be rough. Vernon had made that clear. Told her she was being sent to the frontier, that it wouldn't be easy, that she should be grateful anyway. But this wasn't rough. This was barely survival. She walked to the single window and rubbed a circle in the grime so she could see out. Snow, hills, gray sky, nothing else. Not even a road. Just that one set of wagon tracks already being filled in by fresh snowfall. For the first time since Vernon told her she was leaving, real fear hit her. Not fear of Calder, not fear of being married to a stranger, fear that she was going to die out here. San. She fed the fire first, found the woodpile on the north side of the cabin, just like he'd said, and hauled in enough to last the night. It was hard work. The logs were frozen together, and her hands weren't used to this kind of labor. By the time she got a decent stack inside, her palms were raw. Then she looked at the gaps in the walls. Wind was coming through steady, making the fire flicker. She could feel it on her face, cold and constant. If she didn't do something, they'd freeze tonight. Well, she'd freeze. Maybe Calder was used to it. There was a bucket in the corner with what looked like old rags. She grabbed a handful, wet them from the water bucket, and started stuffing them into the worst gaps. It wasn't a real fix. Come morning, they'd freeze solid and probably fall out. But it was better than nothing. She worked until her hands were too cold to keep going, then crouched by the fire and held them out to the flames until feeling came back in needle-sharp pricks. The light outside was fading. Couldn't have been past 4 o'clock, but the sun was already going down behind the hills. By 4:30, it would be full dark. Calder wasn't back. Arlen ate a piece of the jerky, tough and oversalted, but edible, and half the bread. She thought about saving the rest, but didn't know when there'd be more, so she ate it all. Hunger had been her companion long enough that she knew not to waste food when you had it. Then she sat at the table and waited. The wind picked up, the fire crackled, shadows moved across the walls. He came back an hour after full dark. The door opened and he stumbled in, bringing cold air and the smell of whiskey with him. He kicked the door shut, shrugged out of his coat, and stood there swaying slightly, drunk. He'd gone somewhere and gotten drunker. "You're still here," he said. Wasn't clear if that surprised him or disappointed him. "Where else would I be?" "Thought maybe you'd run off. Women do that sometimes. In the middle of a blizzard, with no horse and no idea where anything is." He laughed, short and bitter. "Yeah, still happens." He crossed to the bed, sat down heavily, and started pulling off his boots. Got one off, gave up on the second, and fell back onto the mattress. Arlen stayed at the table. "Are you going to tell me what this is?" What is?" "This." She gestured around the cabin. "You, me, this whole situation. Because I was told I was coming here to marry a rancher. I don't see a ranch. You're looking at it. This isn't a ranch. This is a shack in the middle of nowhere with barely any food and walls that won't make it through winter. Then I guess I'm not much of a rancher." He rolled onto his side, back to her. "There's room on the bed if you want it, or you can freeze. I already told you. Don't matter to me. I'm not getting in that bed with you. Suit yourself." Within 2 minutes, his breathing deepened. He was asleep, or passed out. Hard to tell the difference. Arlen sat there, staring at the fire. She thought about Vernon, probably spending whatever money he'd gotten for her on whiskey and cards. Thought about the wagon driver, already halfway back to wherever he came from. Thought about the land baron, whoever he was, who'd arranged this whole mess. Then she thought about the blood in the snow. Still didn't know what that had been. Didn't know if she wanted to. She was so tired her bones ached. But she didn't trust the bed, didn't trust him, didn't trust any of this. So she dragged one of the chairs closer to the fire, wrapped herself in her still damp coat, and tried to sleep sitting up. The wind howled outside. The fire burned low. And somewhere out in all that frozen darkness, something howled back. Morning came hard and gray. Arlen woke with her neck screaming and her whole body stiff from cold. The fire had died to ash. Frost coated the inside of the window. Calder was already up, standing by the door pulling on his coat. He looked like hell, pale, haggard, hands still shaking. "There's a creek about a quarter-mile east," he said without preamble. "Frozen over, but you can break through. We need water." Arlen pushed herself up from the chair. Every muscle protested. "You want me to haul water? Now?" "I want us not to die of thirst, so yeah. Maybe you should do it, since you know where it is." "I got other things to do." "Like what?" His jaw tightened. For a second she thought he might actually answer. Then he just grabbed the empty bucket by the door and shoved it toward her. "Creek's east. Follow the tree line. You'll see it." "I've never—" "Then you'll learn." He walked out, again, just like yesterday. Arlen stood there holding the bucket, anger starting to burn through the exhaustion. This was her life now. Hauling water in freezing cold for a drunk who could barely look at her. Living in a cabin that was falling apart. Eating jerky and stale bread until that ran out. And then what? Starving? She thought about just staying inside, letting him come back and find her sitting by the dead fire. Bucket still empty. What would he do then? But the anger wasn't strong enough to override survival instinct. She put on her coat, picked up the bucket, and went outside. The creek was farther than a quarter mile, more like half, and the tree line wasn't a clear marker. It was a scattered mess of bare cottonwoods and scrub pine that could have meant anything. By the time she found it, her feet were numb and her lungs burned from breathing frozen air. The creek was exactly like he said, frozen solid, at least on the surface. She could hear water moving underneath, but the ice was thick. Arlen set down the bucket and looked around for something to break through with. Found a fallen branch, dead and heavy, and swung it down hard onto the ice. It bounced off, didn't even crack. She tried again and again. On the fifth swing, the branch broke in half, and she nearly fell backward into the snow. "God damn it," she hissed. She tried with the bucket itself, slamming the edge down. That didn't work either. Tried stamping on it with her boot heel. Nothing. Her hands were shaking now from cold or frustration or both. "You're doing it wrong." Arlen spun around. Calder stood at the edge of the tree line, rifle slung over his shoulder. He'd come up silent. How long had he been watching? "Then show me how to do it right," she snapped. He walked over, knelt by the creek, and pulled a hatchet from his belt. Swung it down once, clean, controlled, and the ice cracked. 3 more swings, and there was a hole big enough to fit the bucket through. He stood up, handed her the hatchet. "Keep this with you. Ice freezes back over fast." Arlen took it. "You couldn't have given me this before?" "Didn't think about it." "You didn't think about it." "I got a lot on my mind." "Yeah, well, so do I. Like how I'm supposed to survive out here when you won't tell me anything." His face went hard. "You want a list? Fine. Haul water twice a day, morning and evening. Keep the fire going, or we freeze. Ration the food because there isn't much and won't be more until spring. Don't wander off. Don't waste firewood. Don't expect me to hold your hand through every little... I'm not asking you to hold my hand. I'm asking you to act like I exist. You want me to pretend this is something it's not?" His voice was rising now, raw. "You want me to smile and play house? Fine. You're here. I'm here. We're both stuck in this because other people made choices for us. That's reality. We survive it or we don't. That's all there is." He turned and started walking back toward the cabin. "Where are you going?" Arlen called after him. "Hunting. We're almost out of meat." "When will you be back?" "When I'm back." And then he was gone, disappearing into the trees with that rifle and not a single word more. Arlen stood there, hatchet in one hand, empty bucket in the other, and felt something inside her go cold and sharp. If this was how it was going to be, fine. She didn't need him. She'd survived Vernon. She'd survived worse than Vernon. She could survive this. She filled the bucket with freezing water, hoisted it up, and started the long walk back. 3 days passed like that. Arlen hauled water, fed the fire, stuffed rags into gaps in the walls that the wind tore out every night. Ate tiny portions of jerky and tried not to think about what would happen when it ran out. Calder came and went like a ghost. He'd leave before dawn, come back after dark. Sometimes he brought back small game, a rabbit once, 2 squirrels, another time. He'd skin them outside, cook the meat over the fire without a word, and leave half for her. They didn't talk, barely even looked at each other. He slept on the bed. She slept in the chair, or sometimes on the floor near the fire when the cold got too bad. It wasn't a marriage. It was 2 people existing in the same space, waiting for something to give. On the 4th morning, Arlen woke to find fresh snow falling and the food tin empty. She checked the shelf twice, like maybe she'd missed something. But no, the jerky was gone. The bread was gone. All that was left was half a jar of preserves that tasted like pine sap and regret. Calder was already by the door, pulling on his boots. "We're out of food," Arlen said. "I know. So what are we supposed to do?" "I'm going hunting. Might be gone a few days." "A few days? In this weather, with no food left." "What am I supposed to eat?" The question came out sharper than she meant. "There's preserves." "Half a jar of preserves isn't going to..." "Then make it last." He stood, grabbed his rifle. "Or come with me." Arlen stared at him. "What?" "You heard me. Come with me. You can't shoot, but you can help track, carry gear, whatever." "I don't know how to track." "Then you'll learn, same as the water." He opened the door. Wind and snow blew in. "Your choice. Stay here and ration preserves, or come help get real food. Decide now." She looked at the empty tin, looked at the pathetic jar on the shelf, looked at the door and the snow beyond it. "If I go, you actually have to tell me what to do. No more assuming I know things." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite surprise, not quite respect. "Fair." "And when we get back, we talk. About all of this. No more silence." His jaw tightened. For a second she thought he'd say no, thought he'd walk out and leave her there. Then he nodded. Once. Sharp. "Fine. Get your coat." Arlen grabbed her coat off the hook, wrapped a scarf around her face, and followed him out into the storm. The hunting was brutal. Calder moved through the snow like he'd been born to it, fast, silent, reading tracks she couldn't even see. Arlen struggled to keep up, boots breaking through crust, breath coming hard. He didn't slow down for her, didn't wait. If she fell behind, that was her problem. She learned fast that complaining did nothing, that asking questions got short answers if she was lucky, silence if she wasn't, that the only thing that mattered out here was keeping moving. They followed deer tracks for 6 miles, lost them in a ravine, picked up elk sign near a frozen stream, lost that too when the wind shifted. By midday, Arlen's legs were shaking and her lungs felt like ice. "Can we stop?" she asked. "No. I need to rest. Rest when you're dead." "I'm serious." He spun on her, and the look on his face could have frozen water solid. "You think I want to be out here? You think this is fun? We need meat or we starve. That's reality, so you can rest when we have food. Until then, you keep moving." Arlen wanted to scream at him, wanted to shove him backward into the snow and tell him to go to hell. But he was right, and she hated that he was right, so she kept moving. They walked until the sun started dropping. Then Calder found a spot under an overhang where the snow wasn't as deep and told her they'd camp. Camp? Arlen looked around. There was nothing. No tent, no supplies, just snow and rock. Here. Unless you want to walk back in the dark. He gathered deadfall, built a fire so small it was barely worth calling one, and sat down with his back against stone. Arlen sat across from him, shivering, and watched the flames. "You did okay," Calder said after a long silence. She looked up. "What?" "Today. You kept up. That's more than most people would have done." It wasn't much of a compliment, but coming from him it felt like something. "Why are you like this?" Arlen asked. His expression shuddered. "Like what?" "Like talking to people might kill you. Like you'd rather freeze to death alone than ask for help." "Maybe I would." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." "No." Arlen leaned forward. "You said we'd talk when we got back. Well, I'm holding you to that. You want me to survive out here? Fine. But I need to know who I'm surviving with." Calder stared at the fire. The shadows made his face look skeletal. "You know why I'm out here?" he said finally, voice flat. "You know why Merrick sold you to me?" Merrick. That was the land baron's name. "No. Because I owe him. Because 2 years ago I borrowed money to start a ranch, and everything that could go wrong did. Lost half my herd to disease, lost my partner to a bad fall, lost the rest to a winter that damn near killed me too. And when I couldn't pay, Merrick took everything except this piece of dirt and told me I had 1 more year to make something of it, or he'd take that too." He picked up a stick and jabbed at the fire. Then he said he had a solution, said there was a woman back east who needed a husband and I needed help. Said if I married you, he'd extend the debt another year, give me time to rebuild. Arlen's stomach turned. "So I'm collateral?" "You're a transaction, same as me." His laugh was bitter. "We're both just assets on his books. And when we fail, because we will fail, he takes whatever's left and moves on. We don't have to fail." "Yeah, we do. Look around. This isn't a ranch. It's a grave with walls." "So that's it? You're just giving up?" "I'm being realistic." "No." Arlen's voice came out harder than she expected. "You're being a coward." His head snapped up. "What did you You heard me. You're sitting here acting like it's already over because it's easier than trying. Well, guess what? I didn't come all the way out here to freeze to death with a quitter. You didn't come here at all. You were sold. And so were you, but we're both still breathing, and that means we've got options." "Options?" He said it like the word was poison. "What options?" "I don't know yet, but sitting here waiting to die isn't one of them." They stared at each other across the fire. The wind howled. The flames guttered. Then Calder looked away. "Get some sleep," he muttered. "We leave at first light." Arlen lay down on frozen ground, wrapped her coat tight, and closed her eyes. But she didn't sleep. She thought about Merrick, about debt and control, and people being used like pieces on a board. And she thought about that blood in the snow, and wondered if maybe it had been a warning. They found the elk on the second day. Not found, stumbled into. A bull, massive and dark against all that white, standing in a clearing like it owned the world. Calder froze, held up one hand for Arlen to stop. She stopped, barely breathed. The elk's head swung toward them, black eyes, unblinking. Calder raised the rifle, slow, smooth, sighted down the barrel. The wind shifted. The elk bolted. "Damn it!" Calder fired. The shot cracked through the trees, echoed off hills. The elk stumbled, kept running. "Move!" Calder shouted. They ran, crashing through snow, following blood trail, lungs burning. The elk was fast, even wounded, cutting through drifts like they were nothing. But the blood loss was too much. After half a mile, it slowed, staggered, dropped to its knees. Calder shot it again. The bull went still. He stood there breathing hard, rifle still raised, like he couldn't believe it was real. "We got it," Arlen said. Half statement, half question. Calder lowered the rifle, nodded. "Yeah, we got it." They field-dressed the elk right there, working fast before scavengers came. It was messy, brutal work. Arlen had never done anything like it. But Calder walked her through it, voice steady for once, almost patient. By the time they finished, both of them were covered in blood up to their elbows. "This is enough meat for a month," Calder said, looking at the butchered animal. "Maybe more if we ration." "So we're not going to starve?" "Not this week anyway." He looked at her then, really looked at her, maybe for the first time since she'd arrived. "You did good," he said. Arlen wiped blood on her coat. "So did you." For just a moment, something passed between them. Not friendship, not trust, but maybe the beginning of something that could turn into either. "Come on," Calder said. "Long walk back." They hauled the meat through snow and cold, taking turns carrying the weight. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting and both of them could barely stand. But they had food. And for the first time since Arlen arrived, the cabin felt a little less like a grave. That night they ate fresh elk cooked over the fire. Not fancy, just meat on sticks, charred and salted. But it was hot, and there was enough of it, and after days of nothing, it tasted like victory. Calder sat across from her, firelight catching the angles of his face. He looked less haunted than usual, tired, but in a way that came from work instead of despair. "Thank you," Arlen said. He glanced up. "For what?" "For letting me come, for teaching me." She paused. "For not giving up." "Haven't proved we're not giving up yet. One elk doesn't change anything. It changes tonight." He didn't argue with that. They sat in silence for a while, just eating and listening to the fire. "Merrick's going to come back," Calder said eventually. "Probably in a month, maybe 2. When he does, he's going to want to see progress. A functioning ranch, livestock, something. And we don't have that." "No." "So what do we do?" Calder stared into the flames. "I don't know." But the way he said it was different than before. Not hopeless, just uncertain. Like maybe if they thought hard enough, there might be an answer. "We'll figure it out," Arlen said. "You don't know that." "No, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway." He looked at her, really looked at her. And something in his expression shifted, like he was seeing a person instead of a problem. "You're stubborn," he said. "Yeah, so are you. Difference is my stubborn's gotten me nowhere." "Then maybe it's time to try a different kind." She didn't know if he believed her, wasn't sure she believed herself. But when she lay down that night, on the floor near the fire, still not trusting the bed, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope, exactly, but the space where hope could grow if given half a chance. Outside, the wind howled. The snow kept falling. And inside that broken cabin in the middle of nowhere, 2 people who'd been sold and forgotten started to believe that maybe survival was just the beginning. The elk meat lasted 3 weeks. They rationed it carefully, smoking what they could over the fire, burying the rest in snow to keep it frozen. It bought them time, but time had a way of running out faster than either of them wanted to admit. Calder taught Arlen how to set snares for rabbits, how to read animal tracks in snow, how to tell which ice was safe to walk on and which would crack under your weight. He didn't soften exactly, but he stopped treating her like a burden, started treating her like someone who might actually make it through winter. She learned his patterns. He woke before dawn every day, always sat on the same side of the bed to pull his boots on, always checked the rifle even when he wasn't planning to use it. He drank less than that first week, but still kept a bottle within reach. Some mornings his hands shook so bad he could barely hold his coffee cup. "You don't have to pretend I don't notice," Arlen said one morning, watching him grip the cup with both hands to keep it steady. He looked at her, expression blank. "Notice what?" The shaking, the drinking. Didn't realize I needed your permission. You don't. But if you fall apart out here, we both die. So maybe I've got a right to worry. He set the cup down. I'm not falling apart. Could have fooled me. I've been like this for 2 years. If I was going to fall apart, I'd have done it already. He stood, grabbed his coat. I'm checking the snares. You coming or staying? Coming. They walked out into cold so sharp it felt like breathing glass. The snares were empty except for one that had a half-eaten rabbit carcass. Something bigger had gotten there first and left scraps. Wolves, Calder said, crouching to examine the tracks. Pack moved through last night. See how the prints overlap? At least 4, maybe 5. Arlen looked at the torn rabbit, stomach turning. Are we in danger? Not if we're smart. Wolves don't usually bother people unless they're starving. He reset the snare. But they'll take livestock if we ever get any, and they'll keep hitting these traps if they know there's easy food. So what do we do? Move the snares. Set them farther out where the pack hasn't marked territory yet. He straightened, wiped blood off his hands into the snow. Means longer walks to check them. I can handle longer walks. He glanced at her. Yeah, I'm starting to think you can. They moved 4 snares that morning, Calder showing her how to spot game trails, how to position wire so animals wouldn't see it until too late. Her fingers were clumsy with cold, but she got the hang of it eventually. On the way back, Calder stopped suddenly. What? Arlen asked. He held up one hand for silence, turned his head, listening. At first she didn't hear anything. Then, faint, distant, a sound like breaking wood. Someone's at the cabin, Calder said. They ran. By the time they got there, a wagon was pulling away down the valley, already a quarter-mile gone, and standing in front of the cabin, looking at the door like he owned it, was a man in a heavy fur coat with 2 others flanking him. Merrick. Arlen knew without being told. Something about the way he stood, casual but commanding, like he was used to people doing what he wanted. He turned when he heard them approach, and his face broke into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Calder Rusk, he said, voice smooth, cultured. Thought maybe you'd died. Would have saved me a trip. Calder stopped 10 feet away. His whole body had gone rigid. What are you doing here? Checking on my investment, making sure you haven't burned the place down yet. Merrick's gaze slid to Arlen. And this must be the wife. Arlen, isn't it? You look half frozen, poor thing. Calder not taking good care of you? We're managing, Arlen said, voice flat. Managing. Merrick laughed. That's one way to put it. He gestured at the cabin. May I? No, Calder said. Now don't be rude. I own this land, remember? Technically, I own everything on it, including you 2. He pushed past Calder and opened the door without waiting for permission. Arlen looked at Calder. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Come on, he muttered, and followed Merrick inside. The cabin looked worse with Merrick in it. His fur coat, his polished boots, his clean-shaven face, they made everything around him look like the poverty it was. He walked around slowly, taking in the patched walls, the meager supplies, the single bed. One of his men stayed by the door. The other stood near the fireplace, hand resting on the pistol at his belt. Well, Merrick said finally, this is depressing. We're surviving, Calder said. Surviving isn't thriving. Our agreement was that you'd build something here, a functioning ranch. I don't see any livestock, no fences, no improvements at all, really, except he nudged a rag stuffed in a wall gap with his boot. These. Charming. It's winter. Can't do much in winter. Other people manage. Other people planned ahead. Merrick turned to face him. I gave you 2 years, Calder. 2 years to prove you could turn this into something worth keeping. And what have you done? Married a stranger and hidden in this shack hoping I'd forget about you. The debt's not due until spring. The debt's due when I say it's due. But I'm feeling generous, so I'll give you another month, 30 days. He held up one finger. That's when I come back. And if I don't see real progress, livestock, infrastructure, something that tells me you're not just wasting my time, then we're done. I take the land, you take whatever you can carry, and we call it even. That's not the deal we made. The deal we made was contingent on effort. I'm not seeing effort. I'm seeing 2 people waiting to die. Merrick walked to the door, paused. 30 days. Don't disappoint me. He left. His men followed. The door swung shut. For a long moment, neither Calder nor Arlen moved. Then Calder grabbed the whiskey bottle off the shelf and threw it. It shattered against the far wall, glass and alcohol spraying across the floor. 2 years, he said, voice shaking. 2 years of breaking my back out here, and he shows up like it's nothing, like I'm nothing. He's trying to scare you. It's working. Arlen walked over, careful of the broken glass. What happens if we can't pay? Really? He takes everything, and I don't know, find somewhere else to starve, I guess. Where would we go? Nowhere. There's nowhere. He laughed, bitter. You were right that night by the fire. I am a coward. I should have fought back years ago, should have told him to go to hell. But I didn't, and now we're both paying for it. Then maybe it's time to stop paying. He looked at her. What's that supposed to mean? I don't know yet, but sitting here feeling sorry for ourselves isn't going to change anything. She thought for a moment. He said he wants to see progress, livestock, infrastructure. We don't have money for livestock, and even if we did, winter's the worst time to buy. Animals die. That's why I lost my first herd. What if we didn't buy them? You want to steal cattle from who? Not cattle, and not steal exactly. Her mind was working faster now. You said there are other ranches out here, right? Other people Merrick's squeezing? A few. Most of them hate me because I'm associated with him. But they hate him more. Calder frowned. Where are you going with this? What if we talked to them? What if we figured out a way to help each other instead of all drowning separately? Nobody's going to help us. We're broke and desperate. That makes us a bad bet. Maybe. Or maybe they're desperate too and just haven't admitted it yet. Arlen crossed her arms. You said wolves work in packs because it's smarter than hunting alone. Why can't we? He stared at her. You're serious? Do you have a better idea? He didn't answer. 30 days, Arlen said. We've got 30 days to figure something out or lose everything. I'd rather try something crazy than just wait to fail. Calder was quiet for a long time. Then he bent down, started picking up pieces of broken glass. There's a ranch about 10 miles north, he said finally. Guy named Farrell. He's been out here longer than me. Lost half his land to Merrick 3 years ago, barely holding on to the rest. If anyone might listen, it's him. Then we go talk to him. He might shoot us on sight. Then we'll duck. Calder looked at her, and something almost like a smile crossed his face. You're crazy. Yeah, so are you, apparently, because you're considering it. He finished picking up glass, dumped it in the corner, and grabbed his coat. We leave at dawn, he said. And if this goes bad, I reserve the right to say I told you so. Deal. That night, Arlen lay awake listening to wind hammer the walls and thought about everything that could go wrong. They could get lost in the snow. Farrell could refuse to help. Merrick could come back early. The wolves could find them. But doing nothing guaranteed failure. At least trying gave them a chance. She must have finally fallen asleep because the next thing she knew, Calder was shaking her shoulder. Sun's up, he said. Time to go. They walked through snow that came up past their knees in places. The sky was the color of old iron, threatening more weather. Calder set a brutal pace, and Arlen matched it, boots breaking through crust, breath coming in frozen clouds. Around midday, they crested a ridge and saw it. A ranch spread across a small valley. Actual buildings. A barn. A house with smoke coming from the chimney. Fences that looked maintained. That's it, Calder said. Farrell's place. They descended carefully. Halfway down, a shot cracked through the air. Both of them hit the ground. Don't move, a voice shouted from somewhere near the barn. I got you sighted, Calder raised his hand slowly. Farrell. It's Calder Rusk. I know who you are. That's why I'm pointing a gun at you. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to talk. Talk to Merrick. You're his dog, aren't you? Not by choice. Please, just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Silence. Long enough that Arlen thought maybe Farrell had decided shooting them was easier than talking. Then, stand up. Slow. Keep your hands where I can see them. They stood. A man emerged from behind the barn, older, maybe 50, with a gray beard and a rifle pointed at Calder's chest. Who's the woman? Farrell asked. My wife, Arlen. Merrick sent her to spy. Merrick sold her to me like I was buying a horse. She's got no love for him either. Farrell's eyes narrowed. What do you want, Rusk? To not die. And to stop Merrick from taking everything we've built. Calder lowered his hand slightly. I think you might want the same thing. I want you off my property. Then shoot us and get it over with, or hear us out and maybe we all survive this. Farrell didn't lower the rifle, but he didn't fire either. You've got 3 minutes. Talk fast. Calder glanced at Arlen. She gave a slight nod. Merrick's coming for my land in 30 days, Calder said. He wants to see progress I can't show him. When he takes it, he'll own a continuous stretch from my place to the creek, which puts him right up against your western border. So? So how long before he decides your land would look better as his? How long before he finds a way to squeeze you the same way he squeezed me? I can handle Merrick. Really? Because I thought the same thing 3 years ago. Now look at me. Calder's voice went hard. He doesn't fight fair. He doesn't have to. He's got money, lawyers, politicians in his pocket, and we've got nothing except the dirt we're standing on and each other. There is no each other. I don't trust you. You don't have to. You just have to hate him more than you hate me. Farrell's finger was still on the trigger, but he was listening. What exactly are you proposing? He asked. I don't know yet. That's the honest answer. But I know we're stronger together than apart. I know Merrick can pick us off one by one. But if we coordinate, if we share resources, if we watch each other's backs, maybe we stand a chance. Maybe he's not good enough. Maybe he's all I've got. They stared at each other. The wind picked up, blowing snow across the valley. Then Farrell lowered the rifle. Come inside, he said, before you freeze. But if this is a trick, I'll put a bullet in you myself. Understood. Farrell's house was warm, genuinely warm, with a stove that actually worked and walls that kept the wind out. It made Arlen realize how close to freezing they'd been living. Farrell poured coffee, real coffee, not the burnt chicory substitute they'd been drinking, and sat across from them at a rough wooden table. Why now? He asked. Merrick's been squeezing people for years. Why are you suddenly interested in fighting back? Because I'm out of options, Calder said, and because I'm tired of rolling over. You should be tired. You've been rolling over since you got here. Farrell sipped his coffee. I heard about your first herd, heard you made every mistake a new rancher could make, heard your partner died and you didn't even bury him proper. Calder's face went pale. That's true? Yeah, I know. Everyone knows. That's why nobody wants to work with you. You're bad luck. Then why are you listening? Because I'm desperate too. Farrell set down his cup. Merrick raised my lease rates twice last year. I'm barely staying afloat. If I have another bad season, I'm done. So yeah, I'm interested in anything that might keep that bastard's hands off my land. He looked at Arlen. What about you? Why are you pushing this? Arlen met his eyes. Because I didn't come all the way out here to watch us lose. And because men like Merrick only win when people are too scared or too tired to fight back. I'm not scared. And I'm not that tired yet. Farrell studied her. Then slowly, he smiled. You know what? I believe you. He turned back to Calder. All right, here's what I know. Merrick's got contracts with at least 6 other ranchers in this territory. Some are managing okay. Some are drowning like you, but nobody talks to each other because he's got us convinced we're competing for scraps. What if we stopped competing? Arlen asked. That's a nice idea, but ranching doesn't work that way. We're all trying to sell the same products to the same markets. Maybe we don't sell separately. Maybe we pool resources, combine herds, share grazing land, split profits. You mean a cooperative? Farrell laughed. Tried that 20 years ago down in Colorado. Fell apart in 6 months because everyone fought over who was doing more work. Then we make better rules this time. Clear agreements. Everything in writing. Still doesn't solve the immediate problem, Calder said. I've got 30 days. Even if we convinced everyone to work together, that's not enough time to show Merrick anything real. Farrell drummed his fingers on the table. What if you didn't have to show him anything? What if you just made him back off? How? Merrick's power comes from information. He knows who owes what, who's struggling, who's about to fail. He uses that to stay ahead. Farrell leaned forward. But information goes both ways. If we knew what he was hiding, we might be able to turn it against him. You mean blackmail, Arlen said. I mean leverage. Merrick didn't get rich being honest. I guarantee he's got secrets. We find them, we might be able to make him reconsider this whole 30-day deadline. Calder shook his head. Finding secrets takes time, and we don't even know where to start. I do. Farrell stood, walked to a shelf, and pulled down a ledger. I keep records. Every payment I've made to Merrick for 3 years. Every conversation. Every time his rates changed and why. He dropped the ledger on the table. A lot of things in here don't add up. Rates that jump for no reason. Fees that appear out of nowhere. I think he's been cooking his books, overcharging some people to cover losses from others. That's illegal, Arlen said. Sure is, but proving it means getting into his records, which means getting into his house. You're talking about breaking in. I'm talking about doing what needs to be done, Farrell looked at Calder. You want to survive this? You want your land back? Then you can't play by his rules. You have to break them. Calder was quiet. Arlen could see him thinking, weighing risks, calculating odds. If we get caught, he said slowly, we're not just losing the land, we're going to jail. Maybe worse. If you don't try, you lose anyway. At least this way you go down swinging. But Calder looked at Arlen. What do you think? She thought about the cabin, about hunger and cold and that look on Merrick's face like they were insects he could crush whenever he wanted. I think I didn't come here to play fair, she said. I came here to survive. If that means breaking into his house and stealing what we need, then that's what we do. Farrell grinned. I like her. Calder rubbed his face. This is insane. Probably, Arlen agreed. You in anyway? He looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. Yeah, I'm in. They spent the next 2 hours planning. Farrell had been to Merrick's estate once, years ago for some business meeting. He sketched out a rough layout, main house, servants' quarters, office where the records were likely kept. He's got people there, Farrell said. Housekeeper, cook, couple of men who work security, but most of them sleep in the quarters, and the main house is usually empty at night, except for Merrick himself. So we go at night, Calder said, and hope he's a heavy sleeper. Farrell looked at the sketch. Office is on the first floor, east side. Window faces the garden. If you can get in there without waking anyone, you might have a shot. Might, Arlen repeated. That's the best I can give you. They left Farrell's place as the sun was setting, promising to return once they'd scouted Merrick's estate. The walk back felt longer, colder. The weight of what they were planning settled on both of them. We could still back out, Calder said halfway home. Go back to just trying to survive the 30 days. And then what? He takes the land and we start over somewhere else? With no money, no supplies, in the middle of winter? I know, He stopped walking. I've failed at everything, Arlen. Everything I've touched falls apart. What if this does too? She turned to face him. Then we fail. But at least we tried. At least we didn't just roll over. You make it sound simple. It is simple, not easy, but simple. She started walking again. Come on, we're losing light. They made it back to the cabin after dark. Inside, Arlen fed the fire while Calder heated water for coffee. Neither of them talked much, both thinking about what came next. Finally, Calder said, I'm sorry. Arlen looked up. For what? For how this started. For treating you like you were part of the problem instead of... He trailed off. Instead of what? Instead of the only reason I'm still trying. Something in Arlen's chest tightened. Calder, I mean it. You could have given up, could have demanded I send you back, or just waited for Merrick to take over and made a deal with him yourself. But you didn't. You stayed. You pushed. You made me believe this might actually work. We don't know if it'll work yet. No, but for the first time in 2 years, I think it might. That's because of you. They looked at each other across the firelight, and for the first time since Arlen arrived, the space between them didn't feel like a gulf. It felt like something they could cross if they chose to. We should sleep, Arlen said quietly. Big day tomorrow. Yeah. But neither of them moved. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled. And two people who started as strangers sat in silence that felt less like loneliness and more like understanding. Eventually, Arlen stood and grabbed her blanket, but instead of going to her usual spot by the fire, She hesitated. "The floor's freezing," Calder said, "and we're going to need our strength. There's room on the bed if you want it. I'll stay on my side." Arlen looked at the bed, at him, at the choice in front of her. Then she nodded. They lay down on opposite edges of the mattress, a careful distance between them. Arlen pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and closed her eyes. But sleep was a long time coming, because tomorrow they were going to break into a rich man's house and try to steal their future back. And if they failed, there wouldn't be another chance. They spent 3 days watching Merrick's estate from the ridge above it. 3 days lying in snow behind dead brush, taking turns with Farrell's old spyglass, marking patterns and routines. The main house was bigger than Arlen expected. 2 stories, white painted wood that stood out against all that gray landscape like a challenge. Like Merrick wanted everyone to see how much better he lived than the people he squeezed. The staff kept regular hours. Housekeeper left at dusk every evening. Cook stayed later, usually until 7. The 2 security men, Herrick, who'd driven Arlen out here, and another one named Boone, alternated shifts, but both slept in the servants' quarters by 10 most nights. "Merrick stays up late," Calder said on the second evening, watching through the spyglass. "Light in what looks like a study on the second floor. Doesn't go out until midnight sometimes." "That's our window then," Arlen said. "After midnight, when everyone's asleep. Or when we think they're asleep, no way to know for sure." "Nothing about this is sure. We knew that going in." Calder lowered the spyglass and looked at her. His face was raw from wind, dark circles under his eyes. "You scared? Terrified? You?" "Yeah." He almost smiled. "Guess that means we're not complete idiots. Just partial idiots. I'll take it." On the 3rd day, they watched a wagon arrive. Merrick came out to meet it personally, which he hadn't done for any other delivery. 2 men unloaded a heavy trunk and carried it inside under his supervision. "What do you think that is?" Arlen asked. "No idea, but he seemed real interested in it." "Money?" "Maybe. Or documents. Something valuable enough to watch personally." They waited until the wagon left, until the staff went through their usual evening routine, until the lights in the main house went dark one by one. Then they waited another hour just to be safe. The moon was a thin slice. Good for hiding, bad for seeing. They approached from the east, using the garden wall as cover, moving slow and quiet. Arlen's heart was hammering so hard she was sure someone would hear it. The window Farrell had described was on the ground floor, partially hidden by bare rose bushes. Calder tested it carefully. Locked, but the lock was old. He pulled out a thin piece of metal he'd fashioned from a broken saw blade and worked it into the gap between sash and frame. "Where'd you learn to do that?" Arlen whispered. "Wasn't always a rancher. Used to work construction in Denver. You learn things." The lock clicked. The window slid up an inch, then stuck. Calder pushed harder. The wood creaked. Both of them froze. No sound from inside. No lights coming on. After 30 seconds, Calder tried again, slower this time. The window grudged open another few inches, then enough to fit through. "I'll go first," he said. "If something goes wrong, you run. Don't wait for me." "Like hell, Arlen, please. If this goes bad, at least one of us needs to survive to tell people what Merrick is." She wanted to argue, but he was right, and they both knew it. 10 minutes, she said. "If you're not back in 10 minutes, I'm coming in." "Fair enough." He squeezed through the window, landing softly on the other side. Arlen watched him disappear into darkness, then crouched by the wall and tried not to think about everything that could go wrong. Inside, Calder let his eyes adjust to the dimness. He was in what looked like a sitting room, furniture shapes, a cold fireplace, paintings on walls he couldn't make out. A door stood half open across the room. Beyond it, a hallway. He moved toward it, careful of every step. The floor was wood, polished, the kind that creaked if you weren't careful. He kept to the edges where boards were less likely to give. The hallway was darker. He felt along the wall, fingers finding door frames, trying to remember Farrell's sketch. Office should be 3rd door on the left. First door, closed. Second door, open, and he could see moonlight through a window. Dining room, maybe. Third door, closed. He tried the handle. Unlocked. The office was smaller than he expected. A desk dominated the space, neat stacks of papers on its surface. filing cabinets against one wall, bookshelves on another, and on a side table, the trunk from the wagon. Calder crossed to the desk first. The papers were mostly correspondence, letters to other landowners, contracts, payment schedules. He shuffled through them carefully, looking for anything that matched what Farrell had described. Then he found it. A ledger, leather-bound, stuffed behind a stack of surveys. He opened it to a random page and even in the bad light could see the numbers didn't match up. Payments listed at one amount, then crossed out and changed. Names with multiple entries, some marked paid, some not, in ways that made no sense. This was it. Proof Merrick was cooking his books. Calder tucked the ledger under his arm and turned toward the window, then stopped. The trunk. If Merrick had been that careful with it, there had to be a reason. And if they were already here, already risking everything. He crossed to the trunk. It wasn't locked, which surprised him. Maybe Merrick figured no one would be stupid enough to break into his house. Inside were more documents, deeds mostly. Land titles. Calder recognized some of the names, ranchers he'd heard about, properties that had changed hands. All of them transferred to Merrick over the past 5 years. Then, at the bottom, something else. A stack of letters tied with string. He pulled them out, squinted at the handwriting in the moonlight. They were from a territorial judge named Morrison, and they were damning. Morrison writing to Merrick about rulings, about cases involving land disputes. Morrison asking for payment. Morrison promising to make sure certain decisions went certain ways. Bribery, plain and simple. A judge in Merrick's pocket helping him steal land legally. Calder's hand shook as he stuffed the letters under his coat along with the ledger. This was bigger than he'd thought. This wasn't just fraud. This was corruption all the way up. A floorboard creaked outside the office. Calder's breath stopped. He stood frozen, listening. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming down the hallway. He looked at the window. Too far. He'd never make it across the room in time. The door started to open. Calder dove behind the desk, pressing himself against the wood, making himself as small as possible. Light spilled into the room. Someone was holding a lantern. "I know you're in here," Merrick's voice, calm, almost amused. "Saw your shadow against the curtain from upstairs. Really should have been more careful." Calder didn't move, didn't breathe. "Come on now, let's be adults about this. You can hand over whatever you took, and we'll discuss how you're going to pay for breaking into my home." Silence. "Or I can wake Herrick and Boone, and we can make this much less pleasant. Your choice." Calder's mind raced. He could try to run. Merrick was alone, probably unarmed. But that meant fighting, and if he fought, he'd leave evidence. Blood, noise, something that would bring the others running. Or he could give up. Hand over the documents, face whatever punishment Merrick decided. Neither option ended well. Then he heard it. A soft sound from outside. A pebble hitting glass. Arlen. "Last chance," Merrick said, taking a step into the room. "Come out now, or—" The window exploded inward. Glass shattered, spraying across the floor, and smoke poured through the opening. Thick, acrid smoke that filled the room in seconds. Merrick stumbled back, coughing, lantern swinging wild. Calder didn't think, just moved. Burst up from behind the desk, shoulder-checked Merrick hard enough to send him sprawling, and dove for the window. He hit the frame awkward, felt something tear in his shoulder, but momentum carried him through. He landed in the rose bushes, thorns raking his face and hands. Arlen was there, grabbing his arm, pulling him up. "What did you— Wet blanket in the fire pit! Smothers fast! Make smoke! Run!" They ran. Behind them, shouting. Merrick yelling for his men, lights coming on in the servants' quarters. But by then, Calder and Arlen were already past the garden wall, already into the trees beyond the estate. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave out, finally collapsing in a ravine 1/2 mile from the house. Calder rolled onto his back, gasping, and started laughing. Couldn't help it. The absurdity of it, the terror, the sheer stupid luck that they'd made it out. "Did you get anything?" Arlen asked between breaths. He pulled out the ledger and letters. Even in the darkness she could see them. "Oh my God, you actually got them." "We got them. If you hadn't thrown that smoke bomb, wasn't a bomb, was just a wet blanket. Still, you saved us." She looked at him, face scratched from branches, hair wild, eyes bright with adrenaline. We saved us. Together. They sat there catching their breath, reality slowly settling back in. They'd done it. Actually done it. Broken into Merrick's house and stolen proof of his corruption. But now they had to figure out what to do with it. "We can't go back to the cabin," Calder said. "He'll come looking, and he won't be polite about it." "Farrell's? Maybe, but that puts him at risk too." Calder pushed himself up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "We need to get this to someone who can actually do something with it. Someone with authority." "Like who? You said Merrick has politicians in his pocket." "Not all of them. There's a territorial marshal in Cheyenne. Name's Garrett, old friend of my father's. If anyone's going to be clean, it's him." "Cheyenne's 3 days' ride from here." "I know. And Merrick's going to be looking for us." "I know that too." Arlen was quiet for a moment. Then she stood, brushing snow off her coat. "Then we better get moving. The longer we wait, the more time he has to cover his tracks." They made their way back toward Farrell's place, moving carefully, avoiding open ground. Took them 2 hours to cover 3 miles. Every sound made them jump. Every shadow could have been one of Merrick's men. Farrell was still awake when they arrived, sitting at his table with a rifle across his lap. When he saw them, relief flooded his face. "Jesus, I thought you'd been caught." "Almost were," Calder said, dropping the documents on the table. "But we got what we needed." Farrell opened the ledger, scanned a few pages, then looked at the letters. His expression went dark. "This is bigger than I thought," he said quietly. "Morrison's been dirty for years. If this gets out, it'll bring down half the territory's land deals." "Good," Arlen said. "They should come down if they're built on corruption." "I agree. But that makes this more dangerous. Merrick won't just let this go. He'll come after you with everything he has." "Let him come. We're taking this to the marshal in Cheyenne. That's 3 days through winter territory. Merrick's men can track. They've got horses. You're on foot. Then we need horses." Farrell stood, walked to the window, looked out into darkness. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, "I've got 2 horses. Not great, but they'll get you there. You take them. But Calder, if this doesn't work, if the marshal won't listen or can't act fast enough, Merrick's going to burn you for this. Both of you." "I know. And you're still going." "Don't have a choice. We go now or we lose everything anyway." Farrell nodded slowly. "All right. But you leave tonight, right now, before Merrick figures out where you went." They gathered what supplies Farrell could spare: food, blankets, ammunition. The horses were older mares, sturdy if not fast. Farrell saddled them himself, hands moving with practiced efficiency. "One more thing," he said as they were preparing to leave. He pulled out a folded paper from his coat. "My testimony. Everything I know about Merrick's dealings, dates, amounts, how he squeezed me. Give this to the marshal too." More voices, stronger case. Calder took it. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you get back alive." They rode out under a sky thick with clouds, no stars to navigate by, just instinct and a vague sense of east toward Cheyenne. For the first few hours, they didn't talk, both focused on covering ground, on listening for sounds of pursuit. The horses were tired. Farrell didn't have fresh mounts to spare, but they kept moving. Around dawn, Calder called for a stop. They were in a narrow canyon sheltered from wind, with enough cover to hide if someone passed. Arlen dismounted, legs shaking. She'd never ridden this long before. Her thighs felt like they were on fire. "You okay?" Calder asked. "I'll live. How's your shoulder?" He'd been favoring it since the window. Now he rotated it carefully and winced. "Probably pulled something. Nothing broken." "Let me see." "It's fine." "Calder, let me see." He shrugged out of his coat, then his shirt. The shoulder was already bruising, purple and yellow spreading across the joint. Arlen touched it gently, and he hissed. "Definitely pulled something. Maybe torn." She looked at him. "You should be resting this, not riding for 3 days." "I'll rest when we get there." "You're going to make it worse." "Then it gets worse. Doesn't change what we have to do." She wanted to argue. But what would be the point? He was right. They didn't have options anymore, just forward. She pulled his shirt back on, helped him into his coat. Their faces were close, breath fogging between them in the cold air. For a moment, neither moved. "If this doesn't work," Calder started. "It will. But if it doesn't, if we get to Cheyenne and the marshal won't help, or if Merrick catches us first," he trailed off. "I want you to know I'm glad you were the one they sent. I know that sounds crazy after everything, but it's true." Arlen felt something tighten in her chest. "Don't talk like we're already dead. I'm not. I'm just saying, in case I don't get another chance." She kissed him. Didn't plan it, didn't think about it, just leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, cold and chapped as they were. He froze for half a second, then kissed her back. It wasn't gentle, wasn't romantic, just two desperate people in a desperate situation holding on to each other like maybe that could keep the world from falling apart. When they pulled back, both were shaking. "We should keep moving," Arlen said. "Yeah," but neither of them moved for another minute. They rode through the day, stopping only to rest the horses and eat small amounts of the food Farrell had packed. The landscape was brutal, rolling hills that never seemed to end, wind that cut through every layer, sky that stayed gray and threatening. Around mid-afternoon, Calder pulled his horse to a stop. "What?" Arlen asked. He pointed back the way they'd come. In the distance, maybe a mile back, dark shapes against the snow. Riders. "How many?" Arlen's voice was tight. "3, maybe 4. Could be anyone. Could be. But I don't want to wait and find out." They urged the horses faster. The mares responded, breaking into a tired trot, but it wasn't enough. The riders behind were gaining. "We're not going to outrun them," Arlen said. "I know. So what do we do?" Calder looked around. They were in open country, no cover except scattered rocks and dead brush. No way to hide. "We make a stand," he said. "With what? 1 rifle against 4? You got a better idea?" She didn't. They found a cluster of boulders and dismounted, pulling the horses behind the rocks. Calder loaded the rifle, checked the ammunition, 6 rounds. Not enough if it came to a real fight. The riders were closer now, close enough to see details. 4 men. Herrick and Boone, both carrying rifles. 2 others Calder didn't recognize. They spread out as they approached, flanking wide. Professional. They'd done this before. "Calder Rusk," Herrick's voice carried across the distance. "Give it up. Mr. Merrick just wants his property back." "Property he stole," Calder shouted back. "Doesn't matter. You broke into his house. That's a crime. You're coming back to face justice." His justice or real justice? Only one kind that matters out here. The riders were within rifle range now, close enough that Calder could take a shot. But if he did, they'd return fire, and with 4 rifles against 1, the math was bad. "What do we do?" Arlen whispered. Calder's hands were shaking on the rifle, not from cold this time, from knowing they were trapped. They couldn't fight, couldn't run, couldn't... A shot cracked through the air, but not from the riders, from somewhere behind them. One of Merrick's men jerked, grabbing his arm, horse rearing. 2 more shots. Boone's horse screamed and went down. The other riders scattered, looking for the shooter. "What the hell?" Calder started. Then he saw them. 3 riders coming from the north, moving fast. One of them was Farrell. The other 2 Calder didn't know, but they were shooting at Merrick's men with the kind of accuracy that came from years of frontier living. Merrick's crew didn't wait to see how many more there were. They wheeled their horses and ran, Boone running on foot after his mount went down. Farrell pulled up next to the boulders, grinning. "Thought you might need some help," he said. "How did you—" "Figured Merrick would send people after you. Grabbed some neighbors I trust and followed." He gestured to the other 2 riders. "This is Cole and Martinez. They've got their own reasons for hating Merrick." Cole, a lean man with a scarred face, tipped his hat. "Heard you got proof he's dirty. That true?" "It's true," Calder said. "Then get it to Cheyenne. We'll make sure nobody follows you." "You don't have to—" "Yeah, we do. We're all tired of bending knee to that bastard. You actually do something about it. That helps all of us." Cole checked his rifle. "Now get moving before they regroup." Calder looked at Farrell. "Thank you. Thank me by making this count. And when you get back, we talk about that cooperative idea. For real this time." They rode hard after that, pushing the horses past tired into exhausted. But the way ahead was clear, and by nightfall the mountains that backed Cheyenne were visible on the horizon. They stopped to rest only once, huddled together against the cold, and Calder told Arlen about his father. How he'd been a marshal himself before he died. How he'd always said the law was only as good as the people willing to enforce it. He'd be proud of you, Arlen said. Maybe. Or maybe he'd say, I should have done this years ago. You're doing it now. That's what matters. They reached Cheyenne the next afternoon, exhausted and half frozen, but still carrying the documents that could bring Merrick down. The marshal's office was a small building near the center of town. Calder tied the horses and helped Arlen down. She could barely walk after 3 days of riding. Inside, a deputy looked up from paperwork. Help you? Need to see Marshal Garrett, Calder said. It's urgent. Marshal's in court right now. Won't be back until... Tell him Calder Rusk is here. Tell him it's about land fraud and judicial corruption, and if he doesn't see me right now, a lot of people are going to lose everything they have. The deputy's eyes widened. He disappeared into a back room. 5 minutes later, an older man emerged, gray hair, weathered face, star on his chest. He looked at Calder, and recognition flickered. Sam Rusk's boy. Yes, sir. Last time I saw you, you were knee-high. Your father was a good man. Garrett's expression hardened. What's this about corruption? Calder laid the ledger and letters on the desk. Everything you need to know about how a land baron named Merrick has been stealing from people for 5 years, including bribing Judge Morrison to rule in his favor. Garrett opened the ledger, read for a minute, then looked at the letters. His face went pale. Where did you get this? His house. I broke in and took it. You what? I know it's not legal, but neither is what he's been doing, and I couldn't think of another way to prove it. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed the ledger and looked at Calder hard. If this is real, if this holds up, this is going to turn the territory upside down. Merrick's connected. Morrison's been sitting on the bench for 15 years. The people they're tied to... He shook his head. You're asking me to go after some very powerful men. I'm asking you to do your job, Calder said. Same job my father did. Going after powerful men when they break the law. Garrett studied him, then looked at Arlen. And you are? Arlen Rusk, his wife. I was there when we took those documents. So you're both admitting to breaking and entering? Yes. That's a crime. I could arrest you right now. You could, Arlen said. But then Merrick wins. And everyone he's been crushing keeps getting crushed. Is that the justice you want? Garrett looked between them, then at the documents, then back at them. Finally, he sighed. All right, I'll look into this. But you two stay in town until I'm done. Don't go back to your land, don't contact Merrick, don't do anything that might compromise this investigation. Understood? Understood, Calder said. There's a boarding house 2 blocks west. Tell Mrs. Chen I sent you. She'll give you a room. Garrett picked up the ledger. And pray to whoever you pray to that this evidence is as solid as it looks, because if it's not, we're all in trouble. They left the marshal's office and stood on the street as the sun set behind buildings. Cheyenne was bigger than anywhere Arlen had been. Actual streets, stores, people walking around like winter wasn't trying to kill them. You think he'll actually do something? She asked. I don't know, but we did everything we could. They found the boarding house. Mrs. Chen was a tiny woman with sharp eyes who took one look at them and immediately started heating water for baths. You look half dead, she said. Both of you. Marshal Garrett must think highly of you to send you here. That night, clean for the first time in weeks, and lying in an actual bed with actual sheets, Arlen and Calder didn't talk. They just lay there, exhausted, listening to sounds of the town outside. And for the first time since this whole thing started, they slept through the night without fear. The waiting was worse than the running had been. At least when they were moving, when Merrick's men were chasing them, and every moment demanded action, there wasn't time to think about failure. But now, stuck in a boarding house room in Cheyenne, with nothing to do but wait for Marshal Garrett to decide their fate, the fear had time to grow teeth. 3 days passed with no word. Arlen spent most of them staring out the window at the street below, watching people go about their lives like the world wasn't balanced on a knife's edge. Calder paced until Mrs. Chen told him he was going to wear a groove in her floor, then sat at the small desk and tried to read a newspaper but never made it past the first page. On the fourth morning, there was a knock at the door. Calder answered it to find the deputy from the marshal's office, the same young man who'd looked at them like they were crazy when they first walked in. "Marshal wants to see you," the deputy said. His expression gave nothing away. "Both of us?" Arlen asked, coming up behind Calder. "Both of you." They walked through Cheyenne's muddy streets in silence, the deputy leading. The sun was out for once, making everything glitter with melting snow, but Arlen barely noticed. Her stomach was tight with anticipation. This was it. Either Garrett had found something solid enough to act on, or they'd just destroyed their lives for nothing. The marshal's office was busier than last time. 2 more deputies working at desks, a man in expensive clothes arguing with someone about a property boundary. Garrett saw them come in and gestured toward his private office. Inside, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Papers covered his desk in organized chaos, and the ledger they'd stolen sat open in the middle of it all. "Sit," Garrett said. It wasn't a request. They sat. Garrett leaned back in his chair, studying them with tired eyes. "I've spent the last 4 days going through these documents, cross-referencing with territorial records, talking to people I trust, and I'm going to tell you something that's probably going to scare you." Arlen's hands clenched in her lap. "What?" "Everything you brought me is real. The fraud, the bribery, all of it. Merrick's been systematically stealing land for 5 years, and Judge Morrison has been helping him do it legally." Garrett tapped the ledger. "This is the kind of corruption that ruins territories, the kind that makes people stop believing in law entirely." "So you're going to arrest them?" Calder asked. "I'm going to try, but here's where it gets complicated." Garrett pulled out another document, something with official seals. "Morrison's appointed by the territorial governor. Can't just throw him in jail without cause. And he's got powerful friends who will fight any charges. Merrick's the same, connected to half the wealthy men in Wyoming, probably has favors owed all over the place." "So what are you saying, that even with proof, nothing happens?" "I'm saying this is going to be a fight. A long, ugly fight. And it's going to put targets on your backs even bigger than the ones already there." "We already have targets," Arlen said. "Merrick tried to have us hunted down in the middle of nowhere. How much worse can it get?" "A lot worse. Once I file charges, once this becomes public, Merrick's going to pull every string he has to discredit you. He'll say you forged documents, say you're criminals trying to avoid paying legitimate debts. He'll destroy your reputations and make sure no one believes a word you say." Calder was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if he can't discredit us because there are too many voices?" Garrett raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Farrell, the rancher who helped us, he gave us his testimony too. And there are others. At least a dozen people Merrick's been squeezing the same way he squeezed me. What if we get all of them on record? What if instead of just our word against his, it's 20 people all saying the same thing?" "You think they'd be willing to testify?" "Some of them, yeah, especially if they know they're not alone." Garrett considered this, drumming his fingers on the desk. "It would help. Multiple witnesses, multiple testimonies, all pointing to the same pattern of behavior. Harder for Merrick to dismiss all of you as liars." He looked at Calder. "But you'd have to convince them. And some of these people have probably been living scared for so long they won't want to stick their necks out. Then we make them see they don't have a choice. That if we don't stand together, Merrick picks us off one by one anyway. That's assuming you can even reach them. Merrick knows you're here by now. His lawyers probably already know I'm investigating. The minute you leave this office, you're at risk." "We were at risk the second we broke into his house," Arlen said. "Nothing's changed except now we have a chance to actually win." Garrett studied her. "You're either very brave or very stupid. Haven't decided which yet. Can it be both?" That got almost a smile out of him. "All right. Here's what we're going to do. I'll start the process of filing charges against Morrison. That'll take a few days. Need to go through territorial prosecutors, make sure everything's airtight. Meanwhile, you two go back and gather as many testimonies as you can. Get them in writing, signed, dated. Bring them back here within 2 weeks." "2 weeks?" Calder said. "That's not much time." "It's all you've got. Once I file on Morrison, Merrick's going to know the walls are closing in. He'll either run or he'll fight, And if he fights, we need overwhelming evidence. Garrett stood. I'm putting my career on the line here. My reputation. Because your father was my friend and because this is the right thing to do. Don't make me regret it. We won't, Calder said, standing too. Thank you. Thank me when it's over. Until then, watch your backs. Merrick's dangerous when cornered, and you just cornered him about as hard as anyone ever has. They left the office with a sense of purpose that felt almost like hope. It was fragile, this feeling, like it might shatter if they looked at it too hard. But it was there. Where do we start? Arlen asked as they walked back toward the boarding house. Farrell, he knows most of the ranchers in the area. If anyone can help us convince people to testify, it's him. You think he'll do it? It's asking a lot. I think he's been waiting for someone to finally stand up to Merrick. This is his chance, too. They packed their few belongings and settled their bill with Mrs. Chen, who pressed a package of food into Arlen's hands and told them to be careful. Then they were on the horses again, riding back west toward the valley, toward uncertainty and danger, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could win this. The ride back took longer than the ride out. They were more careful now, avoiding main trails, sticking to ridges and valleys where they could see anyone coming. Twice they spotted riders in the distance and hid until they passed. Whether they were Merrick's men or just other travelers, neither wanted to find out. They reached Farrell's ranch on the 6th evening, tired and sore but intact. Farrell met them at the door with his rifle lowered and relief written across his face. Thought maybe you'd gotten killed, he said, ushering them inside. Or arrested. Neither. Not yet, anyway. Calder pulled off his coat and immediately moved toward the stove to warm his hands. Garrett's filing charges against Morrison, but he needs more than just our testimony. He needs everyone. Farrell's expression went serious. Everyone meaning every rancher Merrick squeezed, every person with a story about being cheated or threatened or forced off their land. We need written testimonies, signed and dated, that all corroborate the same pattern. That's a tall order. Most people out here don't want trouble. They just want to survive. They won't survive anyway if Merrick keeps taking everything. You know that. Calder looked at him. You said you wanted to fight back. Here's how we do it. Together. All of us at once. Farrell poured coffee for all three of them and sat at his table, thinking. The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the windows. I know 8 ranchers off the top of my head who have grievances, he said finally. Real ones. Land taken, payments that don't make sense, pressure to sell. But getting them to put their names on paper, he shook his head. That's asking them to make themselves targets. They're already targets, Arlen said. They just don't know when Merrick's going to pull the trigger. This way, at least they're fighting back. Maybe. Or maybe they see it as painting bullseyes on their own backs, for no guarantee it'll work. Then we make them understand it will work. We show them the evidence. We tell them about Garrett, about the charges, about how close we are to actually bringing Merrick down. Farrell sipped his coffee, staring into the cup like it might have answers. All right, I'll help you reach them, but I'm not promising they'll listen. That's all we can ask. They spent that night planning. Farrell drew a rough map showing where each of the ranchers lived, how long it would take to reach them, what kind of reception to expect. Some were friendly, he said. Some were bitter and broken. One, a woman named Sarah Kemp, who'd lost her husband to a suspicious riding accident right after refusing to sell to Merrick, was angry enough to probably help, but also unpredictable. What kind of unpredictable? Arlen asked. The kind that might shoot first and ask questions later. Her husband's death wasn't an accident. Everyone knows it. She knows it. But nobody could prove anything, and Merrick ended up with her best grazing land anyway. Farrell tapped the map. If you can get her on your side, others will follow. She's got respect around here. Then we start with her. They left at dawn, riding north through country that was starting to show hints of spring. The snow was thinner at lower elevations, and here and there Arlen saw patches of brown grass pushing through. It should have felt like hope. Winter ending, new growth coming. Instead, it just felt like running out of time. Sarah Kemp's ranch was smaller than Farrell's, but better maintained. Fences that actually stood straight, a barn that wasn't falling apart, fields that looked like they'd been cared for by someone who knew what they were doing. But the woman who answered their knock looked like she'd been carved from stone and left out in the weather too long. lean, hard-faced, gray hair pulled back tight, and holding a shotgun. "State your business," she said. No preamble, no pleasantries. "Mrs. Kemp, my name's Calder Rusk. This is my wife Arlen. We're here to talk about Merrick." "I got nothing to say about him. We're not working for him. We're trying to bring him down." That got her attention. The shotgun didn't lower, but her expression shifted slightly. "How?" "We stole proof he's been committing fraud. Got a territorial marshal looking into it. But we need testimonies from everyone he's hurt. Need to show it's not just us with a grudge. And you think I'm going to put my name on a piece of paper saying Merrick's a crook? Make myself a target?" "You're already a target," Arlen said quietly. "He took your land. Killed your husband to do it. What's left for him to take?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "He could take this place, could take my life, could make what's left of it so miserable I'd rather die. Or you could help us take everything from him instead." So they stared at each other. Two women who'd both been beaten down by circumstances beyond their control but refused to stay down. Finally, Sarah lowered the shotgun. "Come inside. But if this is some kind of trick, I'll put both of you in the ground." Inside, the ranch house was immaculate. Everything in its place, floor swept, dishes clean. The kind of order that came from needing control over something, anything, when so much had been taken away. Sarah poured whiskey. Good whiskey, not the rotgut Calder had been drinking, and listened while they explained everything. The ledger, the letters, Morrison's corruption, Garrett's investigation. When they finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. "My husband's name was Thomas," she said finally. "He built this place from nothing, worked every day of his life to make it profitable. And when Merrick came around offering to buy, Thomas told him to go to hell." She took a drink. Week later, Thomas went out to check the north fence line and his horse came back without him. Found him 3 days later at the bottom of a ravine. Horse was fine. Thomas had a bullet hole in his back. Arlen felt sick. "I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't help, but maybe taking Merrick down does." She looked at Calder. "You really think this'll work? That a marshal in Cheyenne can touch someone as connected as him?" "I think if we don't try, he wins. And if he wins, more people die like Thomas." Sarah was quiet again. Then she stood, walked to a desk, and pulled out paper and pen. "Tell me what you need me to write." By the time they left Sarah's ranch, it was late afternoon and they had her testimony in Calder's saddlebag. 3 pages of detailed accounts of Merrick's harassment, the suspicious circumstances of Thomas's death, and the theft of her grazing land. It was damning. It was angry. It was exactly what they needed. "One down," Arlen said as they rode toward the next ranch. 7 more to go. The next 3 days were a blur of riding and talking. Some ranchers welcomed them, eager to finally have someone listen to their stories. Others were suspicious, afraid, convinced that fighting back would only make things worse. One man, a homesteader named Chen, who'd lost everything and was barely surviving in a sod house, actually laughed when they told him they were taking on Merrick. "You might as well try to stop the sun from rising," Chen said. "Men like him don't lose, they just find new ways to win." "Not this time," Calder said. "We've got proof. Real proof. Evidence that'll hold up in court. Courts are run by his friends. You really think they'll turn on him? Garrett will make them. He's already filed charges against Morrison." That stopped Chen's laughter. "Morrison, the judge?" "The same. Turns out he's been taking bribes from Merrick for years." Chen studied them with new interest. "And Garrett's actually going after him? Not just talking about it?" "Already started the process." "Well then." Chen stood, brushed dirt off his pants. "Maybe you're not as crazy as I thought. What do you need from me?" By the end of the week, they had 8 testimonies. 8 different stories that all pointed to the same pattern. Merrick identifying struggling ranchers, squeezing them with impossible terms, then taking their land when they couldn't pay. Some of the stories were worse than others. Sarah's husband murdered. Chen's barn burned down right before harvest. A family named Ortiz, who lost a daughter to pneumonia because they couldn't afford a doctor after Merrick raised their lease rates mid-season. Each story made Arlen angrier, made the fury burn hotter until it felt like it was the only thing keeping her warm. On the 8th day, they met with a rancher named Webb, who had the largest operation of anyone they'd talked to. He listened to their pitch, read through some of the other testimonies, and shook his head. I admire what you're trying to do, Webb said, but I can't help you. Why not? Calder asked. Merrick squeezed you same as everyone else. He has, but I've learned to live with it, pay what he asks, keep my head down, survive. If I go on record against him and you fail, I lose everything. Can't risk it. If we all think that way, he wins by default. Maybe he does, but I've got a wife and 3 kids depending on this ranch. I won't gamble their future on maybe. They left Webb's place discouraged. It was the 3rd refusal they'd gotten, and it stung more each time. But they still had 8 testimonies, 8 voices. It had to be enough. The ride back to Farrell's took 2 days. They were exhausted, filthy, running on determination and not much else. But when they arrived, Farrell had news. Garrett sent a deputy looking for you yesterday, he said. Message is, you need to get back to Cheyenne as soon as possible. Morrison caught wind of the investigation, and he's lawyering up. If you're going to make this stick, it needs to happen now. Now, as in tomorrow, if possible. The deputy said Garrett's calling a hearing in front of the territorial prosecutor. If you've got testimony, bring it all. Calder looked at Arlen. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the way his shoulders sagged. But she could also see the determination. Then we ride tonight, she said. You're half dead already. Both of you. We'll be all the way dead if we wait. Come on. They left within the hour, pushing the horses harder than they should have, racing against a clock that felt like it was ticking down to either salvation or disaster. The moon was nearly full, which helped with navigation but made them feel exposed. Every shadow could hide Merrick's men. Every sound could be pursuit. But they made it through the night without incident, and by dawn, they were within sight of Cheyenne's buildings. Almost there, Calder said. Then a rider appeared on the trail ahead of them. Just one, sitting casual on his horse like he'd been waiting. Herrick. Well, well, he said as they approached. Mr. Merrick thought you might come back this way. Told me to deliver a message. Calder's hand moved toward his rifle. We're not interested in his messages.
Oh, I think you'll want to hear this one. See, Mr. Merrick knows what you're trying to do, knows you've been gathering stories, talking to people, and he wants you to know that none of it matters. Herrick smiled. Because tomorrow morning, Judge Morrison's going to issue a warrant for your arrest. Both of you, for breaking and entering, theft, destruction of property. And once you're in jail, all those testimonies you worked so hard to collect, just paper written by desperate people. Morrison doesn't have that authority anymore. Marshal Garrett's already filed charges. Has he? Because I heard differently. Heard maybe Garrett's having second thoughts about going after such an important man. Heard maybe he's realized his career isn't worth throwing away on some broke rancher's sob story. Arlen felt her stomach drop. You're lying. Maybe. Or maybe Mr. Merrick has friends in places you can't even imagine. Friends who can make problems disappear. Herrick turned his horse. Either way, you'll find out soon enough. Have a good day, Mrs. Rusk. Mr. Rusk. What's left of it, anyway? He rode off, leaving them alone on the trail with doubts growing like poison. He's bluffing, Calder said. But his voice wasn't certain. What if he's not? What if Merrick got to Garrett somehow? Then we're finished, but we won't know until we get there. They rode the last few miles in tense silence. Cheyenne looked the same as when they'd left. People going about their business, shops open, normal life continuing like their entire future wasn't hanging by a thread. The marshal's office was quiet. Just one deputy at the desk, the same young man from before. When he saw them, his expression was unreadable. Marshal's expecting you, he said. Go on back. Calder and Arlen exchanged a look, then went. Garrett was at his desk, and the moment they saw his face, relief flooded through them. He didn't look defeated. He looked determined. Sit down, he said. We've got a lot to go over and not much time. Merrick sent someone, Calder said. Said Morrison's issuing a warrant for our arrest. Morrison tried. I blocked it. Told the prosecutor's office that any warrant issued by a judge under investigation for corruption might want to wait until that investigation concludes. Garrett allowed himself a small smile. Morrison's running scared. That's good for us. Herrick also said you might be backing off. Herrick's a liar working for a desperate man. I'm not backing off. I'm going forward.
He gestured to the testimonies they'd brought. You get them? Calder handed over the packet. 8 ranchers, all willing to testify that Merrick's been systematically defrauding people. Garrett read through them quickly, nodding. This is good. Really good. Combined with the ledger and the letters, we've got a solid case. The hearing's tomorrow at 10. Territorial prosecutor, court recorder, and a review panel. If they find enough evidence to proceed, Morrison gets suspended and Merrick gets arrested pending trial. And if they don't? Then Morrison walks, Merrick walks, and you two probably end up in jail for breaking and entering. Garrett's expression was serious. I'll be honest, this is going to be close. Merrick's got powerful friends. Morrison's been on the bench for years. They're going to fight this with everything they have. But we've got the truth, Arlen said. Truth and justice aren't always the same thing, but we're going to try like hell to make them align tomorrow. He stood. Get some rest. You're both going to need to testify, and you need to be sharp. Mrs. Chen still has your room available. They left the office and walked through town as the sun set. Tomorrow would decide everything. Tomorrow, they'd either win or lose everything they'd fought for. Scared? Calder asked as they climbed the stairs to the boarding house. Terrified, Arlen admitted. You? Same. He stopped at their door. But I'm glad we tried. Whatever happens tomorrow, at least we tried. She took his hand. We did more than try. We fought. And tomorrow we're going to win. How do you know? Because the alternative is unacceptable. So we don't accept it. That night, lying in bed with Calder beside her, Arlen stared at the ceiling and thought about all the paths that had led here. Being sold by her stepfather. The frozen cabin. The hunger and cold and desperation. Breaking into Merrick's house. Running for their lives. All of it leading to tomorrow. And whatever happened, she wasn't going to regret fighting back. Wasn't going to regret choosing defiance over surrender. Outside, Cheyenne slept. Inside, 2 people who'd been written off as failures waited for morning and the chance to prove everyone wrong. The hearing room was smaller than Arlen expected. Just a plain space on the second floor of the territorial building with wooden benches, a table for the review panel, and windows that let in harsh morning light. It should have felt insignificant. Instead, it felt like the entire world had narrowed down to this one room. The review panel consisted of 3 men. The territorial prosecutor, a stern-faced man named Dalton, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. A court administrator named Pierce, who kept adjusting his spectacles and shuffling papers. And a federal circuit judge named Whitmore, who'd been brought in from Colorado specifically because he had no ties to anyone involved. Merrick sat on the left side of the room with 2 lawyers, both in expensive suits that probably cost more than Calder's entire ranch. He looked calm, confident, like this was a minor inconvenience he'd clear up before lunch. Morrison wasn't present. Under investigation, he'd been advised not to attend. But his lawyer was there, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Kendrick, who had a reputation for destroying witnesses on the stand. Calder and Arlen sat on the right side with Marshal Garrett. Behind them, in the gallery, were some of the ranchers who'd given testimony. Sarah Kemp, sitting rigid and angry. Chen, looking nervous. Farrell, steady as stone. Their presence felt like solidarity, but it also felt like pressure. All these people counting on them to win. Prosecutor Dalton called the room to order at exactly 10 o'clock. We're here to review allegations of fraud and judicial corruption, he said, his voice flat and administrative. The charges are serious. The evidence will be examined thoroughly. This is a preliminary hearing to determine if there's sufficient cause to proceed to formal charges and trial. He looked at Garrett. Marshal, you may present your case. Garrett stood. He'd cleaned up for this. New shirt, shaved, hair combed back, but the exhaustion was still visible around his eyes. Thank you. The evidence we're presenting today spans 5 years of systematic fraud perpetrated by land baron Theodore Merrick, facilitated by Judge Morrison through bribery and corruption of judicial proceedings. He placed the ledger on the table in front of the panel. This is Mr. Merrick's personal accounting ledger taken from his office. It shows a pattern of fraudulent payments, falsified debts, and manipulation of lease rates designed to force ranchers into default. One of Merrick's lawyers stood. Objection. That ledger was obtained illegally through breaking and entering. It's inadmissible. The circumstances of acquisition don't change the content, Garrett said, and we're not in a criminal trial yet. This is a review hearing. The panel can examine any evidence they deem relevant. Judge Whitmore nodded. We'll look at it. Continue, Marshal. Garrett laid out the case methodically. The ledger entries that showed inflated debts. The letters between Morrison and Merrick discussing specific rulings. The pattern of land seizures that always seemed to benefit Merrick. With each piece of evidence, he built a picture of systematic corruption. Merrick's lawyers objected frequently, trying to poke holes, question authenticity, cast doubt. But the evidence was solid. Even they couldn't make it disappear entirely. When Garrett finished, Dalton looked at the panel. Questions? Pierce cleared his throat. These letters between Judge Morrison and Mr. Merrick. How do we know they're genuine? Handwriting analysis, Garrett said. I had a territorial clerk who's familiar with Morrison's correspondence compare them. It's a match. We can get a formal expert if needed, but even a casual examination shows consistency. And the ledger? How do we know these entries are in Mr. Merrick's hand? We don't, but they're in his office, in his possession, recording his business dealings. Whether he wrote them personally or had someone else do it, they're his records. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. Marshal, you mentioned testimony from affected ranchers. I'd like to hear from them directly. Of course. I'd like to call Calder Rusk to testify first. Calder stood, legs steadier than he felt, and walked to the chair facing the panel. He'd testified before, small claims disputes, boundary arguments, but never with stakes this high. Garrett walked him through the basics, how he'd borrowed money from Merrick to start his ranch, how the terms had been reasonable at first, but changed without warning, how payments he'd made weren't recorded properly, inflating what he owed, how when he couldn't pay, Merrick had offered to help by arranging a marriage that was really just another form of control. And that's when Mrs. Rusk arrived? Dalton asked. Yes, sir. I was told if I married her, Merrick would extend my debt another year, give me time to get on my feet. Did he? Technically, but the debt was already fraudulent. He was giving me time to pay something I shouldn't have owed in the first place. Mrs. Kendrick, Morrison's lawyer, stood. May I? Go ahead, Whitmore said. She approached Calder with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Rusk, you admit you borrowed money you couldn't repay, correct? I borrowed money I was repaying until the terms changed, but you did fall behind on payments. Because Merrick raised my rates without notice. That's not falling behind, that's being cheated. Or it's the consequence of poor planning. Tell me, Mr. Rusk, is it true you lost your entire first herd to disease? Yes, and that your business partner died in an accident that some say was caused by your negligence. Calder's face went pale. That's not what happened. But he did die while working your ranch, correct? And after his death, you fell into debt, started drinking heavily, and made a series of poor business decisions. Objection, Garrett said. This is character assassination, not relevant questioning. It's absolutely relevant, Mrs. Kendrick said. We're determining if Mr. Merrick's actions were fraudulent or simply reasonable responses to working with an unreliable debtor. She turned back to Calder. You broke into Mr. Merrick's home. You admit this? Yes. And you stole documents. I took evidence of fraud. Evidence you obtained through criminal means, evidence that could have been fabricated or altered to support your narrative. I didn't alter anything. What I took is exactly what he had. So you say, but you're a desperate man with every reason to lie. Why should this panel believe you? Calder looked at her, then at the panel, then at Arlen sitting in the gallery. She gave him a small nod. Because I'm not the only one, he said. Because there are 8 other people in this territory with the same story. Because if you look at the pattern, not just my case, but all of them, it's clear this isn't about me being a bad businessman. It's about Merrick being a predator. Mrs. Kendrick smiled. No further questions. Calder returned to his seat, shaking. Arlen reached over and squeezed his hand. You did good, she whispered. Didn't feel like it. Garrett called Sarah Kemp next. She walked to the stand with her back straight and her jaw set, and when she started talking about her husband's death, her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. Thomas died with a bullet in his back, she said. His horse came home fine. He was an experienced rider. He wouldn't have just fallen into a ravine, but when I asked for an investigation, Judge Morrison ruled it an accident, closed the case. 3 weeks later, Merrick showed up with a new lease agreement that took my best grazing land.
Do you have proof Mr. Merrick was involved in your husband's death? Dalton asked. No, that's the problem. Convenient, isn't it? No proof, no investigation. Just my husband dead and my land gone.
Mrs. Kendrick tried to discredit her too, suggesting grief had clouded her judgment. That correlation wasn't causation. But Sarah didn't break. She stared down the lawyer with the kind of strength that came from losing everything and refusing to lose herself too. Chen testified about his barn fire. Farrell about sudden rate increases. Another rancher about livestock that mysteriously disappeared right before loan payments were due. Each story was different in details but identical in pattern. Merrick creating problems, then offering solutions that only benefited him. By noon, the weight of testimony was overwhelming. Even Merrick's lawyers looked less confident. Then Dalton called a recess for lunch. In the hallway outside, Garrett pulled Calder and Arlen aside. It's going well, better than I expected, but Merrick hasn't testified yet. He's going to try to flip the narrative, make himself the victim. Can he? Arlen asked. He can try, and he's got expensive lawyers who are good at what they do. We need to be ready for anything. They didn't eat much. Just picked at food Mrs. Chen had packed, too nervous to have an appetite. In the gallery, other ranchers talked in low voices, speculating, hoping, afraid to believe it might actually work. At 1 o'clock, they reconvened. Merrick took the stand looking calm and reasonable. He wore a perfectly tailored suit. His hair was neat. His expression one of patient tolerance. He looked like a man being falsely accused and bearing it with dignity. One of his lawyers questioned him gently, letting him tell his version. I'm a businessman, Merrick said. I provide capital to people who need it. Ranching is risky. Many people fail not because of fraud, but because they're undercapitalized or inexperienced. I've tried to help, but I can't force people to succeed. And these allegations of fraud? Complete fabrications. Mr. Rusk borrowed money he couldn't repay. When I tried to work with him, give him more time, he responded by breaking into my home and stealing private documents. Now he's trying to destroy my reputation to avoid his own debts. What about the other testimonies? 8 different ranchers with similar stories? Coordinated? They're all in similar situations, failing ranchers looking for someone to blame. It's easier to accuse me of fraud than to admit they made poor business decisions. It was smooth, convincing. If you didn't know better, you'd believe him. Then Garrett stood to cross-examine. Mr. Merrick, you say you're just a businessman providing capital. How many ranches in this territory do you currently own or control? I'd have to check my records. Approximately. Perhaps 30 or 40 properties. And how many of those were acquired through foreclosure or default? Merrick's lawyer started to object, but Whitmore waved him off. Answer the question. Most of them. But that's not unusual in ranching. It's a difficult business. It is difficult, Garrett agreed, especially when lease rates suddenly double without warning, or when payments made in good faith aren't recorded properly, or when equipment mysteriously breaks right before harvest. He picked up the ledger. This shows you charged Mr. Chen $200 in April, then $300 in May for the same lease. Why? I'd have to review the specifics. These are your records. You should know your own business dealings. I have many properties. I can't remember every detail. But you remember that all these ranchers are just bad businessmen? That detail you remember clearly. Merrick's jaw tightened. I remember people who don't honor their commitments. Oh, like Judge Morrison? Did he honor his commitments, or did you pay him to rule in your favor? That's a lie. Is it? Because we have letters, in Morrison's handwriting, discussing specific cases and specific payments. Garrett held up one of the letters. Here's one where he thanks you for a generous donation and promises to consider your interests in the Ortiz land dispute. 3 weeks later, the Ortiz family lost their ranch. To you. That letter could be fabricated. Could be. Except we've verified the handwriting. And the dates match perfectly with court rulings. And when we check territorial records, there's a pattern going back 5 years. Every disputed case where you were involved, Morrison ruled in your favor. Every single one. Garrett set down the letter. That's not coincidence. That's corruption. I can't control what a judge does. No, but you can pay him to do it, which is exactly what these letters show. Merrick's composure was cracking. Those letters are taken out of context. Morrison and I had a professional relationship. You had a criminal conspiracy. You paid him to steal land for you legally, And when people like Thomas Kemp refused to cooperate, they ended up dead. I had nothing to do with that man's death. But you benefited from it. Within a month of his death, you owned his wife's best land. Seems convenient. Coincidence. There's that word again. Garrett turned to the panel. Everything about this case is supposedly coincidence. The suspicious deaths, the lost payments, the sudden rate increases. The judge who always rules in Merrick's favor. At what point do we stop calling it coincidence and start calling it what it is? Systematic fraud backed by judicial corruption. The room was silent. Then Whitmore spoke. Mr. Merrick, I've reviewed the evidence presented today. The ledger, the letters, the testimonies, and I have to say I find the pattern deeply troubling. Even if we can't prove every allegation, the volume of evidence suggests something illegal was happening. Your Honor, I can explain. I'm sure you can, but this isn't the venue for that. This is a preliminary review to determine if charges are warranted. Whitmore looked at his fellow panel members. Pierce nodded. Dalton, after a long moment, nodded too. Based on the evidence presented, Whitmore said, this panel finds sufficient cause to proceed with formal charges against Theodore Merrick for fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. We also recommend immediate suspension of Judge Morrison pending investigation into judicial corruption. He banged his gavel once. Marshal Garrett, you're authorized to take Mr. Merrick into custody. The room erupted. Merrick's lawyers shouting objections. Ranchers in the gallery standing and talking over each other, Mrs. Kendrick demanding appeals. But through it all, Garrett walked calmly to where Merrick sat and placed him under arrest. Merrick didn't fight, didn't rage. He just looked at Calder and Arlen with cold hatred and said, "This isn't over." "Yeah," Calder said quietly. "It is." They took him out in handcuffs. The great Theodore Merrick, who'd controlled half the territory's land and thought he was untouchable, being led away like a common criminal. Outside the building, ranchers crowded around Calder and Arlen, shaking their hands, thanking them, crying with relief. Sarah Kemp hugged Arlen so hard it hurt. "You did it," she said, voice breaking. "You actually did it." "We all did it," Arlen said. "Every person who testified, every person who refused to stay quiet." Miss Garrett emerged from the building looking exhausted but satisfied. "Morrison's officially suspended. His cases are being reviewed. Anyone who lost land through his rulings can petition for review." He looked at Calder. "Including you. Your debt to Merrick is void. The land's yours free and clear." Calder stared at him. "What?" "All contracts executed through Morrison's court are under review. Since yours was part of Merrick's fraudulent scheme, it's invalid. You don't owe him anything." "The land is yours." Arlen felt tears in her eyes. "It's over. It's really over." "The trial's still coming," Garrett warned. "Merrick's lawyers will fight this all the way. But the worst is done. You won." That night, they stayed at the boarding house one last time. Tomorrow they'd ride back to the ranch, their ranch now, truly theirs, and figure out what came next. But tonight, they just sat by the window and watched Cheyenne settle into evening. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this'll all be a dream," Calder said. "If it is, we're having the same one." He looked at her. "When you arrived, when I saw you step off that wagon, I thought you were just another thing Merrick was using to control me, another way to make me feel like I'd failed. And now? Now I think you're the only reason we survived, the only reason I'm not drunk in that cabin waiting to die." He took her hand. "I don't know what we do next. I don't know if we can make the ranch work, or if we'll be good at this marriage thing, or any of it. But I know I want to try. With you." Arlen squeezed his hand. "Then we try. Together. And whatever comes, we face it the same way we faced Merrick, by refusing to quit." They left Cheyenne the next morning to a clear sky and warming temperatures. Spring was coming for real now, ice melting, grass starting to show green through brown. The ride back took 3 days, and with each mile Arlen felt the weight of fear lifting. They weren't running anymore, weren't hiding. They were going home. When they crested the ridge and saw the cabin in the valley below, it looked different somehow. Still small, still rough, but not like a prison anymore. Like a beginning. Farrell met them there. He'd ridden ahead to make sure everything was still standing and to leave supplies. The cabin was warmer than they'd left it, fire already burning in the hearth, and on the table was a bottle of actual good whiskey with a note. For celebrating, you earned it. Feral. That night they drank the whiskey and made plans. They'd need to fix the walls properly before next winter, build a real barn, maybe get some cattle if they could scrape together the money. Start small and build slow, learning from past mistakes. Think we can do it? Calder asked. I think we already did the impossible. Everything else is just details. The trial happened 3 months later. Merrick fought hard, his lawyers calling in favors, trying every legal maneuver to avoid conviction. But the evidence was overwhelming. The ranchers' testimonies were corroborated by the documents. Morrison, facing his own charges, eventually broke and testified against Merrick in exchange for a lighter sentence. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, Arlen was in the gallery with Calder and felt something settle in her chest. Justice. Real justice. Not perfect, not complete, but real enough to matter. Merrick was sentenced to 15 years. Morrison lost his position and got 5 years. All land seized through fraudulent means was returned to original owners. Some people got back everything they'd lost. Some got back enough to start over. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was better than before. The cooperative Farrell had mentioned became real. 8 ranchers pooling resources, sharing grazing land, helping each other through bad seasons. It wasn't always smooth. People argued about work distribution and profit splits and who got access to what when. But it worked well enough that other ranchers started asking to join. Within a year, they had 20 members. Within 2, they were one of the larger operations in the territory. And at the center of it, helping coordinate and mediate and keep everyone moving in the same direction, were Calder and Arlen Rusk. The cabin got fixed properly that first summer. They sealed the walls with real chinking, fixed the roof, built a second room. The next summer, they built a barn. The summer after that, they added a bunkhouse for seasonal workers. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. They bought cattle, just a dozen at first, then more as profits allowed. Learned better practices, consulted with neighbors, made mistakes, and fixed them. It wasn't easy. There were bad seasons, dry summers, harsh winters, times when money was so tight they ate nothing but potatoes for weeks. But they survived. And slowly, survival became something more. Arlen learned ranching from the ground up. How to rope, how to brand, how to read weather and land and animal behavior. She was good at it, better than good. Within 3 years, other ranchers were coming to her for advice. Within 5, she was running most of the cooperative's logistics. Calder stopped drinking. Not all at once. He had setbacks, nights when the shaking got so bad he almost reached for the bottle. But Arlen was there, and so were friends now, people who checked on them and offered help without judgment. The shaking eventually stopped. The nightmares faded. He started sleeping through the night. They fell in love. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that happens in one moment, the slow kind built from shared work and shared struggle and choosing each other every day. The kind that deepened with every fence they built together, every winter they survived, every problem they solved. 5 years after Merrick's arrest, they sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, still not fancy, but solid and warm in theirs, and watched the sun set over land that finally felt like home. You ever think about what would have happened if we'd just given up? Calder asked. If we'd let Merrick take everything? Sometimes. But then I remember we didn't, and that's what matters. I was so angry when you arrived. Angry at Vernon for selling you, angry at Merrick for buying you for me, angry at myself for being so desperate I went along with it. I was angry too. At everyone. At the world. Arlen leaned against him. But that anger's what kept us alive long enough to find something better. You think Vernon's still out there somewhere? Your stepfather? Maybe. Don't really care. He doesn't get to be part of this. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the land darken. Somewhere down in the valley, cattle were settling in for the night. In the barn, horses shifted in their stalls. Normal sounds. Good sounds. The sounds of life being lived instead of just endured. 7 years after that trial, Arlen gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Sam, after Calder's father. The birth was hard. Midwife said Arlen almost didn't make it, but she pulled through with the same stubbornness that had carried her through everything else. Calder held his daughter for the first time and cried. Ugly crying, the kind that came from years of thinking he'd never have this, never deserve this, that he was too broken, Too much of a failure.
She's perfect, he whispered. She's loud, Arlen said, exhausted and smiling. Takes after you. I don't know how to do this. Be a father. You didn't know how to be a rancher either. Figured that out. 2 years later came a son, Thomas, named for Sarah Kemp's husband. Then another daughter, Claire. The cabin expanded again. The ranch kept growing. The cooperative kept thriving. Other people's stories changed too.
Sarah Kemp rebuilt her operation, made it profitable, eventually remarried a quiet man who'd lost his own wife and understood grief. Chen got his land back, built a new barn, started selling honey from beehives he kept in the high meadow. Farrell became the de facto leader of the cooperative, respected for his fairness and his unwillingness to tolerate anyone trying to replicate Merrick's tactics. The territory changed. New people came, drawn by stories of the cooperative and land that was actually available without corrupt middlemen. Towns grew, schools opened. The railroad came through, making it easier to get goods to market. But through all that change, the cabin stayed. Expanded, improved, but still the same cabin where Arlen had arrived that frozen day and thought she was going to die. On their 20th anniversary, 20 years since that wagon had dropped her off in front of a broken-down shack with a broken-down man, they threw a party. Not at the cabin, but in the community hall that the cooperative had built 3 years prior. 50 people came. Ranchers, families, the marshal who'd retired but still visited regularly. Mrs. Chen, ancient now but still sharp. Sarah Kemp with her husband and grandchildren. Farrell stood up to give a toast, whiskey glass raised. 20 years ago, I met two of the most stubborn, crazy, determined people I've ever known. They were broke, desperate, had every reason to give up, and instead they decided to fight back against the most powerful man in the territory. He looked at Calder and Arlen. You changed everything, not just for yourselves, for all of us. You showed us that power doesn't always win, that if enough people stand together, they can beat the system. So here's to you, to stubbornness, to crazy ideas, to refusing to quit. Everyone drank. Someone started playing fiddle. Dancing began. Late that night, after everyone had gone home and their children were asleep, Calder and Arlen walked outside. The stars were brilliant, cold white points in endless black, the kind of sky that only existed far from cities. You ever regret it? Calder asked. Coming here? Everything that happened? Arlen thought about Vernon selling her, about that first brutal winter, about hunger and cold and thinking she'd die in that cabin, about the terror of breaking into Merrick's house, of running for their lives, of not knowing if justice would actually exist. No, she said finally. I don't regret any of it, because if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have this. But you lost so much. Your old life. My old life was surviving Vernon's temper and hoping I'd make it to next week. This is living, real living. She took his hand. You asked me once what we'd do next, after we won. Remember? I remember. I told you we try. Together. We face whatever comes by refusing to quit. And we did. We did. And we'll keep doing it, for as long as we've got. They stood there under that enormous sky. Two people who'd been sold and traded and written off as failures, who'd fought back against impossible odds and won not just land, but a future. 25 years after Arlen's arrival, Calder died in his sleep, quietly, peacefully, in the bed they'd shared for decades. He was 63, worn down by years of hard work, but satisfied in a way he never thought he'd be. Arlen buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, next to where they'd eventually build a small family cemetery. At the funeral, nearly 100 people came, their children, now grown with families of their own. Neighbors, friends, people whose lives had been changed by what Calder and Arlen had started. Sarah Kemp, old and frail but still strong in spirit, spoke. Calder Rusk taught me something important, she said. He taught me that being broken doesn't mean being finished, that you can lose everything and still build something worth having, that failure isn't the end if you refuse to let it be. Arlen stood by the grave after everyone else left, just her and the wind and the land. We did it, she said quietly to the fresh earth. Everything we said we would. Built a life worth living, raised good kids, changed things for the better. She wiped her eyes. Thank you for letting me be part of it,
for seeing me as more than just a transaction, for choosing to try. She lived another 18 years, kept running the ranch even when her children begged her to slow down, kept attending cooperative meetings, kept advocating for fair deals and honest business, kept telling the story of how things used to be so people would remember and stay vigilant. When she died at 74, surrounded by children and grandchildren in that same cabin she'd arrived at as a terrified young woman, her last words were, "Don't quit. Whatever comes, don't quit." They buried her next to Calder. On the headstone, their children had engraved simple words, Arlen and Calder Rusk. They refused to break. The ranch stayed in the family. The cooperative continued. The story of how two desperate people took on a corrupt land baron and won became legend, told around campfires passed down through generations, embellished and mythologized until it was hard to separate truth from tale. But the core of it remained true. Two people sold and traded like property had refused to accept that fate, had fought back with nothing but stubbornness and each other, had turned defiance into survival, survival into victory, victory into legacy. And 50 years later, when someone asked Arlen's granddaughter what she'd learned from her grandmother's story, the answer was simple. That the world tries to break you, and that you don't have to let it. That even when you're powerless and desperate and everyone's written you off, you still have a choice. You can surrender or you can fight. And which did she choose? She fought, and she won. And that made all the difference. The cabin still stands, expanded over generations, modernized, but the original walls remain, the ones Arlen stuffed with rags to keep the cold out, the ones that witnessed the beginning of everything. It's a museum now, maintained by the family, open to anyone who wants to see where the legend started. And on cold winter days, when wind howls through the valley the way it did that day Arlen arrived, you can almost hear the echoes of two voices refusing to give up, refusing to let the harsh world win, choosing each other, choosing stubborn hope, choosing to build something better from nothing but determination and the belief that maybe, just maybe, the powerless could beat power itself. They did. They actually did. And their story echoes still.